Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm August Peter. Talking with Thomas Doran, author of the Tolkien-inspired Toward the Gleam, the Lucifer Ego, and Kataklusmos. He's worked on hundreds of environmental and infrastructure projects and was president of Tetra Tech, MPS, adjunct professor of engineering at Lawrence Technological University, and member of the College of Fellows of the Engineering Society of Detroit. Tom, thank you for making the time. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Marcus. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you in the studio in person. I always greatly enjoy when guests are able to make this work. Now, given the whole surge of AI technology in general, one of the greatest, not the, but one of the greatest criticisms brought against the emergent technology has to do with the ubiquitousness and the sheer load of energy consumption that data centers take. Before we focus on the AI problem per se, let's talk broad picture here in terms of data centers and how central they've been as a part of our life since the data and information age.
Well, the data centers have been common, prolific, but in recent years, with the advent of artificial intelligence, they're a new animal. You might consider that we've had a few lions and tigers around. Now we've got dinosaurs, at least dinosaurs from the standpoint of the size of these things. And I think one of the challenges that we have, all of us, is getting our arms around what this means. And I would use, you mentioned Tolkien. I would use an image from that. Which maybe many people have, is that he wrote a story about hobbits and wizards and a magic ring. But actually the story is far, far deeper than that. And so when you look at something like data centers and their connection to AI, I think that many times we can fall into a similar trap, which is to focus on one aspect, perhaps the environment, perhaps technology, perhaps politics, and not take a moment to step back and to see that there are a number of different categories of questions that surround it. And to at least have an understanding of all of those things, even if we favor one or two over the other. And of course, faith governs much of this as well, as Pope Leo has recently written.
Just so our listeners have a concept of some of the concerns pertaining to data centers, and we don't want to be one of those people who sounds alarms for the sake of alarm bells, but just so we have a concept, can you share with us the kind of resources that a data center for artificial intelligence processing takes up?
I think that when I look at it, coming from an environmental background, I tend to focus on the environmental impact. So the facilities themselves are fairly good size. However, it's the energy that makes the difference. The energy comes from anywhere from millions to tens of millions of microchips that are in these AI-enabling data centers, primarily just to power those microchips, to do the AI work. And then there's also a second power requirement that comes from keeping them cool enough to do their job, which involves water quite often and some cooling systems. And that, from an environmental standpoint, those are most people's primary concerns with data centers. However, the connected concern is, okay, then where are we getting our energy for this? And that's an important question because they being the data center owners, may want to use a community grid for that power, in which case people are legitimately concerned about capacity, the impact on the grid, and the cost, their cost, right? But not necessarily. Some people are looking into using dedicated nuclear modules, small, fairly compact, modern, different than the big nuclear power plants we used to see. And those would be a different story because the environmental footprint energy-wise would be quite small. And the impact on the community would be quite small if it's a dedicated module. So those are some of the questions that surround it. And until people get an answer to some of those questions, it's really hard to make a judgment about it. Now, some people have approach it entirely from a different perspective, which is a philosophical or a political perspective. And in that case, the environmental questions don't necessarily govern their decision.
The environmental concern is, of course, like you've mentioned, one issue amongst many when it comes to this question. But as you mentioned earlier, in terms of nuclear modules, just so our listeners understand, as you've also alluded to, these modules are different from nuclear processing plants that we've known in the past. Help us understand whether this is a viable solution moving forward, whether there are legitimate concerns, or is this something that we should be hopeful toward?
I'm hopeful. I think that one of my principles is that, as my old advisor used to say, 0 is a very low number, meaning zero risk or zero of anything, right? And 100% is a pretty high number. So most scientists and engineers operate in between those two extremes, right? When we want something to be as close to 100% as possible, or in some cases as close to 0 as possible when it comes to pollution. But that's not possible, especially in an era when we can measure to such extraordinarily low amounts, which is a whole nother discussion, right? So I would say this also. I have in my career had the pleasure, I would say, because I enjoyed my work, have had the opportunity to visit and work at hundreds of different manufacturing facilities and factories, medicines, pharmaceutical, chemical, automotive, food, etc. And the reason I say that is because the environmental footprints, impacts that I saw with many of those facilities, I judge to be far greater than those associated with data centers.
Which is an amazing piece of context to have, because it's quite possible that we're hearing an exaggeration for many of the situations pertaining to AI data centers as well.
Well, it is possible, and I always start by assuming that people are approaching this with good faith. Mm-hmm. However, I think also that people that have ideological concerns with AI may also grasp at any other, whether it's technology, whether it's the environment, those sorts of things, in order to buttress their opinion. I think that there is some of that going on, in my view.
So I'm talking with Tom Doran. He is author of the Tolkien-inspired Toward the Gleam, published by Ignatius Press in 2011. He is an engineer by training. He was also an adjunct professor of engineering at Lawrence Technological University. We are talking about AI data centers and data center surges and how Catholic climate groups are responding to this and how we ought to think of this rightly. We're going to continue on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Speed. I'm talking with Tom Doran, author of the Tolkien-inspired Toward the Gleam, published by Ignatius Press, the Lucifer Ego and Kataklusmos, both published in Kataklusmos published in 2020. And he's worked on hundreds of environmental and infrastructure projects, engineer by training, and he was a professor of engineering at Lawrence Technological University. Now he's a member of the College of Fellows of the Engineering Society of Detroit. Now, Tom, one of the things you mentioned earlier, which is so crucial for us to keep in mind, is that it is easy for some of the narratives we are receiving, including the narratives of concern, to come from individuals who are pushing a particular ideological lean. So we want to presume as much good as possible, but we also need to be a little prudent and wary and cautious and do our own research and weigh the information rightly pertaining to data centers.
Yes, and I think... Marcus, you mentioned context. One pretty famous quote that Nobel Prize physicist Richard Feynman was asked about quantum physics. He knew something about it, and he said, if anyone tells you they know everything about quantum physics, they don't. Mm-hmm. And I've adopted that today to apply to AI. AI is in such a state of flux, rapid flux, that I believe that if anyone tells you that they know everything about AI, they don't. I'm gonna borrow that from Dr. Feynman. For instance, something that occurred to me, we were talking about the energy needs. Even as we speak, chips, microchips, are being advanced to an amazing degree, traditional microchips, but still the speed at which these chips can work, the vastly reduced energy draw when these chips get online, they're especially tailored for AI type of work. So the reason I mentioned that is even as we're discussing this and as the months and years clip by, advances in technology will be diminishing the energy needs of AI for the same amount of AI. Now, if we increase this, then obviously then that can work in the other direction. But that's also true. And then there are even other technologies out there that IBM and others are working on called qubits that are fundamentally different than microchips that would amp that up by light years if they can get that to work properly. So technology is not static, and I learned that in working with environmental projects, that just because we can't deal with a particular environmental problem today doesn't mean that we won't be able to a few years from now, because I've seen that progression in my own career.
There was a point where there was a tremendous push for quantum computing, and we don't hear a lot about that now as it pertains to especially the AI energy consumption conundrum. I welcome your thoughts.
They're trying to work out a challenge. The robustness has to do with being able, on paper, to make this work millions of times faster than current microchips. The challenge is they're working with quantum particles, and you could say that the quantum particles are a bit unruly. So many very smart people are working with that to try to reduce the amount of impact that environmental noise has on what they call qubits, quantum bits. But there's a big research center being embarked on outside of Chicago very soon, campus. University of Chicago is involved in it. IBM and many others are involved in it. So many still believe that in the next 3 to 5 years, we will have commercial quantum computing. Others think maybe 10 years or more, right?
Which in the grand scheme, both of these are very short durations technologically.
Yes, very much so, very much so. So Pope Leo, speaking to this subject boldly, is asking us to be careful about pretending that technology will solve everything. So you've heard me talk about how I've used technology and what I've seen and the advances, and yes, yes, yes. However, the idea that technology in and of itself can solve the big questions of how it relates to human beings and the dignity of human beings is a meta question, the meta question that Pope Leo poses.
From the perspective of just the data centers, if we don't look at the entire AI infrastructure, just the data centers, how are they going to impact, say, the job market and therefore local communities surrounding data centers?
Well, it's a great question. I don't have all the answers. I'll beg the Richard Feynman excuse. But I would say this. They're not an employer as an auto plant would be an employer, or as a food plant would be
or
an
a manufacturing plant.
Yes, they would not be an employer. There will be tradesmen there. There will be experts at fixing things and repairing things, etc. But I would really expect the workforce associated with those data centers to be modest in relation to when we think about a big factory or another big building of that size.
So we know that they're going to take up quite a bit in terms of a geographic footprint. We know that the energy consumption is going to be significant, but like you've mentioned, nuclear modules might be able to make that footprint significantly small. So regardless of the situation, data centers, especially AI processing data centers, are going to be a ubiquitous part of the near future and therefore the future of human societal communal living.
I believe so, yes. And my practical advice to my own kids and grandkids and friends, many of whom are skeptics, which is good. They're questioning. But my advice, some practical advice would be, number one, if you're in business and you turn your back on AI, you will lose business to competitors. And you may have some customers, clients, who won't accept that posture, number one. Number two, I hasten to add that it's an oversimplification. If the good guys don't engage in AI, then the bad guys will have the field, right? So that's not exactly perfect example, but there's something to it.
Yep.
So yes, and so start with what Pope Leo says, or a good summary, and look into it. Look very carefully. I use AI every day, almost every day, mostly on science-based questions, never on writing, but mostly on science-based questions for a perspective, second, third, fourth perspective on it. Yeah.
Well, Tom, we're out of time. Thank you so much for making the time to talk with us about this very important issue.
Thank you for inviting me, Marcus.
My guest has been Tom Doran. He is author of the Tolkien-inspired Toward the Gleam, also the Lucifer Ego and Kataklusmos, and he's worked on hundreds of environmental infrastructure projects. He's an engineer by training, adjunct professor of engineering at Lawrence Technological University, and we've been talking about the AI data processing plant issue, which Pope Leo XIV rightly addressed in Magnificat Humanitas, but from there, we've seen numerous Catholic quarters even come out so abjectly against that we need to have proper conversations about this, and prudential navigation of the issue is a crucial part of our Catholic moving forward on this issue. I'm Marcus Peter.